Have you ever felt like nothing you do will matter in a million years? Or that maybe you're just a small blitz in this large cosmic time frame? Or just small when compared to the universe? Or maybe you've felt like nothing you do will matter because you're going to die. You're just going to die anyway. Why do anything? This is a really depressing way to look at life. But this is the way people argue for the absurd, or so Thomas Nagel suggests. And so he says that these are actually arguments pointing to something that's true, but arguments that kind of fail. So he treats these arguments as arguments and he takes them one by one. Well, if nothing you are going to do will matter in a million years, it's not because it doesn't matter in the future. It's just because it doesn't actually matter right now. When we're talking about meaning, we need to know why something is meaningful. So suppose I set a timer for some cookies, but these are special cookies that take a million years to bake. I don't get to eat these, unfortunately. I'll be dead when they're done. But I set the timer and I make the cookies and the cookies are finished. Something I've done now mattered to when the cookies were going to be done. If no one heard the timer, how would they know to take them out? They could have been overdone if I didn't put the timer on. But the question is, why does it matter whether they're overdone or whether the cookies got made at all? And Nagel argues that things aren't meaningful now, and that's the reason things aren't going to be meaningful in a million years. It's not the other way around. Secondly, let's look at what people mean when they say, oh, I'm so small when compared to the universe, or my life is so short when compared to the cosmic time frame. Okay, well, let's solve these problems. Let's say you're not just the size of a human or an elephant or a house or a city or the world or the galaxy. You're just the size of the universe. All right, absurdity has been destroyed, right? Well, no, not at all. We still are going to have questions about why we're like this way, or why we're so big. If anything, it just seems even more absurd to observe a being that's the size of the universe. This is insane. And the same problem arises with extending your lifespan into the future. Think about it. If you don't just live 100 years or 1,000 or 1,000,000, you live forever, well, you're still going to be wondering, why does anything I do matter? That's the real question we need to answer. And even if it confers a benefit to you later, it's still, why does that benefit matter? And so we're going to touch on that a little bit more. But lastly, Nagel takes the argument that I'm going to die anyway, so why does anything I do matter? Well, this isn't really the issue either, because even if you lived forever, as we just pointed out, you're still not going to have anything matter. And so the crux of the issue doesn't happen with our lifespans or our size or even the future. It's got something more fundamental to do with meaning. And so Nagel wants to define the absurd, and he says that the absurd happens when we expect something to appear one way and it appears another. And a lot of times we can update that. So for example, Nagel talks about someone who is a lover, and he calls his lover and he hears the phone clink and he starts pouring out his heart and writing all the Sabi or talking about all the Sabi poems and how his heart longs for her and her eyes are like the ocean and blah, 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 only to hear a operator say that the phone line has been cut, or that the message box is full, or anything other than the lover, really. And so he expects a retort from his lover of his own love, and yet what he hears is that the mailbox is full. And so he expected one thing, and he heard another. And this is absurd. Of course, the scenario is absurd. You're talking to an operator, telling them how much you love them, or a robot, or just a phone. And so this is absurdity, right? But we can update our understanding of the situation and slowly acclimate and say, of course, I've misunderstood. She didn't pick up. This was the phone line, and that's who picked up. And now the situation becomes less absurd and your expectations adjust. But Nagel says that the real absurdity we're talking about here, the absurd, happens because of our human nature. That it's not something that just arises and can be adjusted to, because it's actually a part of us. And in order to talk more about what that means, we need to start talking about taking life seriously. Nagel says that we all take life seriously. And you might think, no, I'm actually a really, really relaxed person. I just, I don't really take anything seriously. I live under a bridge and I just wake up and, I go surf all day and then I go back to the bridge and I sleep, and that's my life. And Nagel would still say you're taking life seriously, no matter who you are, because he thinks that taking life seriously just means making a decision. Okay, why does he think that? Well, let's look at an example to see why he thinks this. He says that you take life seriously when choosing chocolate over vanilla. Okay, well, let's scrutinize. Why would someone choose chocolate over vanilla? Oh, well, of course, that person enjoys chocolate more. They felt like they wanted chocolate in that moment. Okay, but when you ask why, it seems like, oh, well, I don't know why. I just kind of do like chocolate better. There's no real purpose behind it. You just are the way you are. It's kind of arbitrary, and yet you choose chocolate. So this is where we reflect on our decisions. What do I want to? There's so many ice creams in front of me. Which choice do I want to make? Well, I want the chocolate. That's the one that appeals to me the most. And so you're taking life seriously. You're reflecting on your decisions. You're thinking, and you're making decisions. And this self-reflection leads to us taking life seriously. There's really no way of getting around it at first glance. And Nagel talks about a few ways of getting around it later. But you might think, okay, well, what about more serious decisions? Surely those don't come down to an arbitrary aspect of me or the universe. They're very serious. I've thought them through. You can take maybe having children, for example. People think, oh, if I have children, I'm going to have a lot of work to deal with. Me or my wife is going to have to quit my job to take care of them for a little bit, or even after maternity leave. And I don't know. Children are a lot, but actually, I think I'm going to have a really, really happy life with kids. I really feel something happy when I think about having kids. So you know what? I'm going to do it. Okay. Well, why is being happy important? You're going to put all this time and work. You've thought seriously about it. You've talked with your wife or your husband about it, and you want to have kids, and now it's a decision you've made. Well, why do you want to have kids exactly? I mean, it seems like you just kind of do. I mean, that at the end of the day, and if you don't, you just think that the benefits are not as good as the downsides. It kind of does just come to an arbitrary stop. And so all your decisions and everything in life becomes sort of arbitrary, Nagel says. And so he points this out, and he thinks this is quite odd. We're taking life seriously, and yet when we look for our reasons for doing things, they come back to being this sort of arbitrary, unnecessary, and the reasons are just not that great, he thinks. He thinks that nothing can really be self-justifying. And so when you take one step back and you ask, why did you do this? Why did you do it? Eventually you just come to a concrete bottom, and there can be no infinite loops, he says. And so for this reason, eventually you come to a concrete bottom and everything is meaningless. There's a few other ways he talks about how people try to get out of this. He says, well, actually, I don't want to be happy for myself. I want to do something for other people. I want to cure cancer. I'm really intelligent, and I'm actually going to devote my life to curing cancer. Okay, Nagel says. So why do you want to do that? Well, it brings me a lot of joy. I love seeing other people happy, and I just don't want them to suffer. Okay, why? Well, why? Of course I just don't want them to suffer. Well, of course you don't, but there's no further justification. It doesn't have any sort of greater meaning. There just is less people suffering. And now that's just what's happening. There's no further meaning beneath it all. And he takes a few more examples. He says, well, no, I want to do it for my country. And then, of course, Nagel asks, why does your country matter? And the person is thinking, well, I just really love my country, and I can't really say why it matters beyond it just really seeming to matter to me. It's sort of just as arbitrary. And the last example he takes is that of God. Well, I'm actually participating in God's glory. Nagel says, okay, that's great. So, why does God's glory matter so much? Oh, well, whoa, I've never even thought about this before. Of course, God's glory matters. I guess it just kind of matters because it matters. I mean, I can't really think of anything greater to serve, and I just have this strong intuition that it matters. And so Nagel thinks that no matter what, if you take a step back, you can justify things. But eventually you'll take enough steps back to get to something that you can't explain in further detail. And he contrasts this scenario with that of epistemology and skepticism. For those who don't know, epistemology is the study of knowledge, and skepticism is taking a step back and questioning if you know anything, and if so, what that is. Suppose I smell brownies, and I walk into my house, and I smell brownies, and I go into the kitchen, and I look, and there actually are a pan of things looking like brownies, and I think, okay, there's brownies on the table in front of me. Do I really know that there's brownies in front of me? At first, it seems like, of course, you're looking at them, you're smelling them. But Nagel says that skepticism arises when we can't answer counterfactuals, when we don't know a counterfactual truth question, truth value. So, for example, let's say, how do I know that my wife didn't just spray brownie air freshener all over the house? Well, I guess I kind of don't. I mean, that's a counterfactual that I don't really know the answer to. I smell brownies, but look, I'm looking at the brownies, right? So those have got to be the brownies. Well, how do you know those aren't just things that look like brownies but don't taste like them at all? Maybe that's just some really, really dry bread you're looking at, or a blondie, or some sort of cake. Maybe those aren't brownies at all. And you think, well, yeah, I guess I don't really know if these are brownies or not. And of course, you could just skip all that and say, what if I'm a brain in a vat and this evil demon is making me think I'm seeing brownies? And this is where skepticism comes from, is that you can't answer the counterfactuals of what you think you know. And yet, despite arguably the idea that no one has solved skepticism, no one really knows anything, we continue to go on. And even when you get to something like the rules of logic, well, you can't really prove the rules of logic. You just have an intuition that they're true. And of course, you can't use logic to prove logic, because that would presuppose the very thing that you're trying to prove. So just as with skepticism and absurdity, you get to these bedrocks and you sort of take them for granted. You just have these intuitions, and that's just the way you are. You're just human. And so Nagel says that this is just like the absurdity. This is just how absurdity arises, is that there's these fundamental aspects about being human. We think about our decisions. We can think about our thinking. And we make decisions, and even though when we reflect and we notice they're not totally justified, we continue to make them anyway. We live the same lives. We continue to wake up and go to work and make money and eat food and do things we enjoy or do things we don't enjoy, or, gamble or whatever may have you. We take life seriously, even though we see no reason to. And this is the fundamental conflict that Nagel points out. This is what absurdity is, and it's just a part of us. Nagel thinks that there's no getting around it. So he uses one last demonstration to really highlight where it comes from. He says that we can look at a mouse, and a mouse on its own is not absurd. It is just doing whatever it does. It doesn't think about why it's doing it. It just sort of is a mouse doing mouse things, eating cheese, mating, having kids, dying, crawling in the walls of buildings because they're warm and getting caught in mouse traps. It's just a mouse. But let's give it some self-consciousness. Well, now it realizes how absurd its life is. It can't justify going out, going into this wall over that wall, eating this cheese over that cheese. Why does it do anything? And so it runs into the same issue. So Nagel, in his last part of the essay, says maybe there's a few solutions. So let's kind of go through and see what works and what doesn't. The first solution Nagel suggests is that we can just kind of ignore the problem altogether. But he says that that's a decision, and that requires us to take the problem seriously. And we need to think about it. We need to think about, well, why should I take this problem seriously? And because of that, you can't really ignore the problem without acknowledging it. And if you acknowledge it, then you need to think about it, and you're taking it seriously. And so Nagel thinks that this is not a solution at all, that it doesn't work. His second proposal is that you live the life of an ascetic. And for this reason, you will not be absurd because you actually don't have to make any decisions. You just live in accordance with what is happening around you. But he says that if you pursue this life too vehemently, all of a sudden the problem arises again because now you're making another decision. You're making the decision to live as an ascetic. And so that is exactly where that problem comes from. And one of the last ones he suggests, the last solutions he suggests, is that you could live life on impulse. Don't think about anything. Just make your decisions. Just do whatever you impulsively feel to do. Of course, this wouldn't grant your life any sort of meaning. It would just kind of make you less absurd than everyone else around you. And before offering the toaster and bathtub solution, he says, wait a minute, before we go and do any sort of extremes, before we get our rope in our chair, let's ask, is this really even a problem? And Nagel seems to think it's not. He goes through Camus' argument. He says that Camus says we should rebel against the world, that we look at the universe and we see the meaninglessness and we say, let's live our lives just to spite the universe, just to shake our fist at everything and live our lives anyway. Nagel thinks this is a bit cheesy and romantic, and he offers an alternative solution by dissolving the problem completely and just kind of saying, so what? I mean, I guess we're humans and life is absurd, and this is absurdity. So what's the issue? Ultimately, there isn't one. It's just absurd. That's all. So that's how Nagel concludes his paper. Anyway, this has been a summary of The Absurd, an essay by Thomas Nagel.